In this long debate this year about whether the country has changed or how has it changed, and the people on both sides, of course, one of the most consistent arguments is about this question of civil liberties. If you ask people in most polls in the country, most people appear so far to be prepared to sacrifice some of their civil liberties in the name of security. But there is quite an intense debate beginning, or the debate is become more intense, with the courts becoming involved and with the Congress becoming somewhat more involved, in two major American newspapers today, in the New York Times in New York City and in the Los Angeles Times on the West Coast. Their lead editorials deal with civil liberties. The New York Times says, among other things, to curtail individual rights, as the Bush administration has done, is to draw exactly the wrong lessons from history. And the Los Angeles Times, which has a big editorial called Self-Inflicted Wounds about rights and the new reality, it says, even in wartime, America is not a dictatorship. They're much more in-depth than that. But it certainly is a reminder that this debate is going on in the country with increasing intensity. With a report on that, here's ABC's Jackie Judd.
Attorney General Ashcroft moved aggressively after the attacks, expanding the executive branch's legal authority to root out terror suspects. He ordered the roundup of about 1,200 mostly Middle Eastern men, many whose identities and deportation hearings were kept secret. The creation of military tribunals with broad authority to impose the death penalty. The indefinite detention of American citizens as enemy combatants. Today, Ashcroft is certain he has taken the right course.
So this isn't a competition between freedom and security. The security, its purpose is to secure freedom.
Critics say it is a competition, and the very freedom and civil liberties Ashcroft is trying to protect are in jeopardy.
The government has run roughshod over, virtually every right in the Constitution other than the right to bear arms has been infringed in the name of this war on terrorism.
Some courts are now reeling in the Justice Department. For example, a federal appeals court ruled against the secret deportation hearings, warning that democracy dies behind closed doors. The Justice Department may appeal. And the administration is arguing before another skeptical judge that it has an absolute right to label suspects as enemy combatants. That label means Jose Padilla and Yasser Hamdi, both U.S. citizens and both suspected of aiding the enemy, are being held in virtual isolation in military prisons with none of the rights they would have in civilian courts. Frank Dunham is trying to represent Hamdi.
You just sit there in your little jail cell with no family, no friends, no lawyer, no nothing till this is over because we deemed to put that label on you. That's a pretty scary proposition.
The administration has backpedaled on some initiatives, including a proposed domestic surveillance program called TIPS and a military tribunal's power to hand out the death sentence. But a conservative ally says no one should believe the Justice Department is rethinking how it fights the enemy.
The administration has chosen its side of the legal track, and it is staying there because its conception of where they are is this is a war, we need to prevent the next attack, and to some degree to worry about whether or not we've gotten the law right a bit later.
Getting the law right now or later, a debate that is a legacy of September 11th. Jackie Judd, ABC News, Washington.
In this nation of laws, it is hard to tell where this argument is going to take us in the months ahead, but it is certainly very American to have it. And I don't want to embroil our commentator, George Stephanopoulos, to any greater degree than is fair to anybody, but just tell me this, George, at this point. Where do you think this argument will take us?
I think what's going to happen is you're going to see some more scaling back, some more reining in of the powers that the administration and the executive branch took in the early days after September 11th, and which, frankly, Congress granted them. In the immediate days after September 11th, Congress pretty much codified a lot of the actions that the administration took on their own. Now you're starting to see questions from Democrats and Republicans in the Congress, and as Jackie Judd pointed out in her piece, the courts are starting to scale back, and it may even get to the Supreme Court.
There is some embarrassment at Congress that they gave the administration quite as blank a check as they did, and do you really believe that this will, A, get to the Supreme Court? I think most people do, and do you think quickly?
I think there is one question that should get to the Supreme Court. I'm not sure about the timetable, and that's the question of whether or not these American citizens like Yasser Hamdi and Jose Padilla can be held indefinitely without even the chance to make their case. A lot of legal commentators, most prominently Stuart Taylor in the National Journal, have pointed out that at a bare minimum, they should at least be able to present their case and answer the charge of whether or not they're an enemy combatant. The lower courts seem to indicate that they thought the administration had gone too far, and that should get to the Supreme Court.
Thank you, George. George Stephanopoulos in Washington, joining us periodically in the course of this day and in this evening. We will be back in a moment to continue our coverage, but here is another September 11th postscript. This is about a man named John Labriola. He was a Port Authority worker who was having a meeting on the 71st floor of the North Tower when the first plane hit. He's an amateur photographer, and he had his camera with him.
We didn't hear it as much as feel what happened. We knew to get out. And there was already people walking in that stairwell, and we just joined the stream of people who were walking down. I actually didn't take my camera out for the first half hour or so. And, you know, I didn't even remember I had it until I started seeing the firemen coming up. People who were willing to risk their lives for others and sacrifice themselves in the ultimate way. And how difficult that was. I still can't get my head around that. It was heroic. People were unbelievably gracious to each other. In the stairs, didn't matter what color you were, or didn't care what religion you were. I mean, there were people from every corner of the globe in that building. You know, they all carried themselves in a state of grace.
When we come back, where did all the money go? Billions were donated to 9/11 relief funds. But is the money going to where it's needed most? Plus, how has the past year changed George Bush as our president, as a man? And in tonight's special coverage, an astonishing moment-by-moment account of what it was like inside the towers. The decisions made by some that meant life or death. 9/11 continues.